The salt sting of the Vinland atmosphere was a ghost of a memory, a scent that had clung to Gerald's clothes when he returned. He had come back from that second voyage a hollowed-out man. The cheerful, ambitious youth who had charmed a princess was gone, replaced by a silent, stone-eyed stranger who jumped at the clash of practiced swords and stared into the middle distance as if watching a play only he could see. He would not speak of what happened there, in that green and savage land. He would not speak of anything at all. He left within a month, on a trader's ship headed south, and vanished from the face of the earth. 5 winters had hardened the kingdom, and they had hardened its queen. Helga ruled with a fist of iron, her heart a locked chest of grief and rage. She blamed the softness of her father's guards, the dullness of their blades, the slowness of their reflexes. And so, she worked them until they dropped, drilling them in the courtyard from dawn until dusk, her voice a lash of contempt. "Again!" she would scream, her father's crown a cold, heavy weight on her brow. "Was it this easy for my father's killer? Were you this pathetic?" But her wrath for the soldiers was a simple, clean thing compared to the tempest Gerald had left inside her. She loathed him. She dreamed of sliding her cheeks between his ribs, of watching the light leave the eyes that had once gazed upon her with such devotion. Yet, in the quiet of the night, her treacherous heart would clench with a longing so acute it was a physical pain. He had taken everything from her, and in his leaving, he had left one last, devastating gift. Floki, her secret, joy. The living, breathing proof of their affair, born 7 months after Gerald's disappearance. He had his father's unruly dark hair, his thoughtful brown eyes, and the same slight, serious curve to his mouth. He was a ghost and a blessing, a reminder and a reprieve. Tonight, as she had every night for 5 years, Helga sat on the edge of his small bed, a parchment of her own composing in her hand. The hearth fire cast dancing shadows that played across their faces. "And so," Helga read, her voice softening into a rhythm Floki knew by heart, "the valiant warlord stood upon the hill, his cloak stained with the dusk and the dust of battle. His enemies lay scattered before him, for he was a warrior who knew no defeat. Men whispered his name in fear, and the All-Father himself hallowed his path, for his strength was the strength of the mountains, and his will was the will of the winter sea." Floki's eyes, wide and earnest, stared up at her. "He never lost, Mama. Not even once." "Never," Helga whispered, her throat tight. "His heart was a fortress, and his sword a tongue of lightning." "I want to be like him," Floki declared, his small jaw set with a determination that was achingly familiar. "I want to be strong and never lose." Helga's smile was a fragile, trembling thing. She reached out and brushed his hair back from his forehead. "You are my little wolf. You have his strength. I see it in you every day." She leaned down, kissing his brow, inhaling the sweet, clean scent of him. As she tucked the furs tightly around his small frame, she turned her face away so he would not see the tears that escaped, tracing hot paths through the cool night air. Diana, older now, her own face etched with the worries of the court, moved from the shadows. She placed a gentle hand on Helga's shoulder. "My queen, are you all right?" Helga stood, her back straight and rigid. "No, Diana. I am not, and I fear I shall never be again." The words were a raw confession in the quiet room. "A part of me still wants to find him and kill him for what he did. And another weaker part just wants to ask him why. Why he left me to this." Diana's voice was low and soothing, the voice that had calmed Helga's own childhood fears. "It is a circle, my lady. A circle of violence. Your father. He planted a seed of vengeance in Gerald's heart when he killed his father. Gerald, in his turn, acted upon it, and now that same seed has been planted in yours. You are caught in the same loop, watering that bitter plant with your grief." Helga spun around, her eyes flashing with sudden, incandescent fury. She knew where this was going, and the knowledge was a spark to tinder. "What are you saying, old woman?" "You must be the one to break the circle," Diana said, her gaze flickering towards the sleeping boy. "For his sake." The fury crested, white and hot. This was her pain, her son, her throne. How dare she speak of this? How dare she speak of him? Helga strode to the door, pulling it open and gesturing sharply into the hallway. Diana, with a sad, knowing look, obeyed. In the dim torchlight of the corridor, Helga leaned close, her voice dropping to a venomous, shaking whisper. Floki is my son. He is not Gerald's son. He never was, and he never will be. Do you understand me? His father is a story, a ghost, nothing more. Diana opened her mouth, a protest or a plea on her lips, but Helga cut her off with a slash of her hand. To your room. Now. With a deep, weary bow, Diana turned and retreated down the hall, her footsteps echoing softly. Helga watched her go until the darkness swallowed her. Then she turned and walked to her own chambers, each step heavy with the weight of the crown and the lie she had just enshrined. She barred the door behind her. The royal chamber was vast, filled with trophies of her father's reign and the rich tapestries of her own. But in that moment, it felt as small and as cold as a tomb. The queen, the ruthless ruler, the avenging daughter, collapsed onto the great bed. The composure she wore like armor shattered. She curled into herself, a knot of anguish and contradiction, and wept, great heaving sobs that held 5 years of loneliness, 5 years of rage, and a love that refused to die. She cried until her body was spent and her mind was numb, finally surrendering to a fitful tear-stained sleep, alone in the vastness of her power. Meanwhile, Gerald was no better. The clang of the hammer was a dull, repetitive prayer that did nothing to quiet the storm in Gerald's soul. Each strike on the glowing red iron was meant to be a blow against the memories, but they only grew sharper. The heat of the forge was a pale imitation of the fire that had once burned in him, and of the warmth of Helga's touch. His father's smithy in the quiet English village was his prison and his refuge. Here he was just the blacksmith's son, a quiet, capable man who kept to himself. No one knew he had sailed to the edge of the world. No one knew he had held a princess in his arms. No one knew he had driven a Sikhs into a king's heart. The act that was supposed to unshackle him had only forged new, heavier chains. Vengeance was ash in his mouth. The ghost of King Selwyn did not haunt him. The ghost of Helga's face, twisted from love to hatred in a single bloody moment, did. He saw it every time he closed his eyes. He could not return to Norway. He was a regicide there, a dead man walking. Yet, a desperate, foolish part of him wished for nothing more than to see her one last time. To stand in her presence, even if it meant her guards cut him down. He imagined her often, Queen Helga, married to some powerful jarl, a golden-haired son at her knee. The thought was a physical ache, a cold stone in his gut. She had moved on. She was building a life, a dynasty, while he was here, hammering horseshoes, slowly rusting from the inside out. His only tether to the world was his mother, Kayla. The strong, smiling woman who had sent him off to Vinland with hope was gone, replaced by a frail, coughing shadow propped up by pillows in the small room behind the smithy. Her illness had crept in during his absence, a slow thief stealing her strength. Her need for him was the one clear duty in his fog of regret. One afternoon, as a cold drizzle misted the village, the physician emerged from Kayla's room, his face grim. Gerald wiped his sooty hands on his apron, his heart thudding with a familiar dread. "It's her lungs, Gerald," the physician said, his voice low. "The usual remedies are spent. There's a new fever now. She needs something stronger or—" He didn't finish the sentence. "What does she need?" Gerald's voice was rough from disuse and smoke. "Name it. I will get it." The physician hesitated, looking at Gerald with pity. "There is a drug. A powerful extract from a white willow that grows in the northern fjords. It's rare, expensive. The Norsemen have the best supply. It's ground with honey and a certain type of peat moss that only seems to grow. Well there. Where can I get it here?" Gerald pressed, a knot of desperation tightening in his chest. The physician shook his head slowly. "You can't. Not in time. The merchants who carry it. They source it from the ports in the Norse homeland. From Norway. The word landed like a hammer blow. Norway. The one place he could not go. The place that held everything he loved and everything he had destroyed. The physician's words faded into a dull roar in Gerald's ears. He saw the fjords of his memory, not as places of majestic beauty, but as the gates to his own personal hell. His heart didn't just sink. It plummeted, dragging the last vestiges of his hope into a dark, cold abyss. To save his mother, he would have to walk back into the lion's den. He would have to risk the axe, the scorn, the fury of a nation. And he would have to face the one person he both longed for and feared more than death itself, Helga. He stood there, frozen in the doorway of the smithy, the drizzle cooling the sweat on his brow. The path forward was a blade's edge, and it led directly back to the source of all his pain. And so he journeyed to the place his destiny once began. Gerald stood, facing the city gate, thinking if it was a bad idea. But his mother needed him. She is all he has left in the world. Here goes nothing, he exhaled deeply as he advanced into the city. The familiar fjords of Norway, once a breathtaking vista of homecoming, now felt like the jaws of a trap. Gerald's small fishing boat slipped into the harbor under the cover of a misty twilight, but there was no cover from the new reality of his homeland. Where there had been laughter and commerce, there was now the grim clatter of discipline. Soldiers, clad in the royal crest he knew too well, patrolled in tight formations. Their eyes, sharp and suspicious, scanned every face. The air was thick with the tension of a realm preparing for an unseen war. Gerald kept his head down, the hood of his worn cloak pulled low, his heart hammering against his ribs. This was not the Norway he had left. This was Helga's Norway, forged in grief and hardened by vengeance. His blood ran cold when he saw it, nailed to a post near the fish market. A weathered poster, with a skilled artist's rendering of his own face. It was him, yet not him. This was the face of the killer, the eyes hardened, the jaw set with a cruelty he didn't remember possessing. Below it, words screamed their promise. Wanted, Gerald the Kinslayer, for the murder of King Selwyn. A bounty of 10,000 silver marks. The number was staggering. It meant every man, woman, and child in the kingdom would be his enemy for a chance at that fortune. He moved like a ghost, his senses screaming, every shadow a potential threat. He found a small, cluttered apothecary tucked away in a back alley, the scent of drying herbs and bitter roots a stark contrast to the metallic fear in the air. The old chemist listened, his eyes rheumy but intelligent, as Gerald described the drug, the white willow extract and the rare peat moss. "Hi," the old man wheezed, nodding slowly. "I know the one. Powerful stuff for fevers that cling to the lungs. But I don't have it. No one here does. Where can I find it?" Gerald asked, his voice barely a whisper. The chemist leaned closer, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "The Queen's own physician, Master Alric. He's the only one permitted to compound it. Keeps a tight hold, he does. Says it's too potent for common use." Gerald's mouth went dry. "And where does Master Alric reside?" "Why, in the palace, of course," the chemist said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Has his chambers in the old boys' quarters, near the library. Easier access to the royal family, you see." The world seemed to tilt. Palace. The very heart of the beast. The place where Helga ruled, where her hatred for him was codified in law and reinforced by every soldier in the streets. Surely it can be found elsewhere, in another village, a larger port. Gerald pressed a desperate plea. The chemist shook his head firmly. "No, son. The Queen's decree. All stores are controlled by the crown. Only Master Alric. Your only chance is to petition the palace, but—" He gestured vaguely towards the door, to the world of soldiers and wanted posters. "These are not times for petitions from strangers." Petitioning was not an option. There was only one path left, a path of shadows and utter madness. That night, under a moonless sky that felt like a conspirator, Gerald became a phantom. He used knowledge from a happier time, a forgotten drainage culvert, a loose stone in the outer wall, a servant's route used for taking out refuse, paths he and Helga had once used for secret trysts. The memory was a fresh wound as he slipped through the darkness. The palace was even more heavily guarded, with sentries posted at every corner, their torchlight cutting through the dark. This was a fortress expecting a siege. He moved with a hunter's silence, his senses stretched to their limit. The old boys' quarters. Near the library. His heart thundered in his chest, a frantic drumbeat against the silence. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant footfall, felt like a thunderclap. He was a mouse in a lion's den, driven by a love that felt like a curse and a duty that felt like a death sentence. He was inside Helga's home, hunting for the one thing that could save his mother, while the ghost of the man he had been, and the king he had killed, walked silently beside him. That night, Helga had never been more confused. The dream was so real she could feel the weight of his arm across her waist, the whisper of his breath against her neck. Gerald was there in her bed. His eyes soft, the ghost of a smile on his lips she had not seen in 5 long years. "I will never leave you again," he murmured. His voice the familiar low rumble that had once been her sanctuary. "You and our son. Never." Their faces were inches apart. She could feel the pull, the magnetic, heartbreaking draw towards him. As their lips were about to meet, the universe shattered. Helga woke with a start, a gasp tearing from her throat. The emptiness of the bed was a physical blow. The silence of the room was a mockery. A raw, guttural scream of frustration and anguish erupted from her, and she swept a hand across her bedside table, sending a porcelain vase crashing against the stone wall. The door flew open instantly, a young guardsman standing alert, his spear held ready. "Your Majesty, are you?" "Get out," she snarled, her chest heaving. "No one is to disturb me. No one." The soldier bowed hastily and retreated, closing the door with a soft, final click. Helga swung her legs out of bed, the cold stone seeping into her bare feet. She walked to the window, throwing the shutters open. The night wind, sharp and cold, bit into her skin, but she welcomed it. She let it wash over her, trying to scour away the feeling of his touch, the echo of his promise. "Her son." The dream words were a poison and a balm. She leaned her forehead against the cold stone, her breath fogging in the air, her heart a leaden weight in her chest. Meanwhile, a shadow moved through the bowels of the palace. Gerald, using every ounce of his scout's training, found the described building near the library. The boys' quarters were quiet. A back window, left slightly ajar for the night air, was his entry point. He slipped inside, his movements silent as falling snow. He found Alric asleep in a chair by a dying fire, a scroll unfurled in his lap. In a fluid motion, Gerald was on him, a hand clamped over his mouth, the cold, sharp point of his seeks pressed against the old man's throat. "Do not make a sound," Gerald whispered, his voice low and desperate. "I need the white willow and peat moss extract. Give it to me and I will leave. You will not be harmed." The physician's eyes, wide with initial terror, slowly calmed. He nodded as best he could. When Gerald cautiously removed his hand, Alric spoke, his voice surprisingly steady. "You are not a common thief." As Alric moved slowly around his cluttered chambers, gathering small, precious vials, he kept talking, his tone conversational, diagnostic. "This is for a severe lung fever." "Who is it for?" "My mother," Gerald said shortly, his eyes darting to the windows and door, his body coiled tight. "A noble cause," Alric murmured, measuring a dark paste into a small clay jar. "A perilous journey for a mother. Why not petition the queen? She is not without mercy." Gerald's jaw tightened. He looked away, refusing to answer, his focus on the silence outside, which felt suddenly heavy, pregnant with threat. Alric finished and handed over a small leather pouch. It is all here. Enough for a full course. Gerald took it, stowing it carefully in his own bag. The weight of it was a profound relief. Thank you, he said, genuine remorse in his voice. And I am sorry for this. She is all I have left. Alric looked at him, a deep sadness in his aged eyes. And I am sorry, son. Gerald froze. For what? Because the Queen and her guards have surrounded this house. I sent a signal the moment you entered. Pedal under my desk. I had no choice. As if on cue, the door exploded inwards. Soldiers poured into the room, a tide of iron and fury. They were on him before he could even raise his Sikhs, disarming him, dragging him roughly out into the night. In the torchlit courtyard, standing regal and icy in her night robe, a cloak thrown over her shoulders, was Helga. The wind whipped her hair, and her eyes were not those from his dream. They were glaciers, hard and impenetrable. The sight of him, real and flesh and blood after 5 years, struck her like a physical blow, but she did not flinch. Her voice, when it came, was clear, sharp, and devoid of all feeling, cutting through the night air. The Kinslayer, she declared, the title a death sentence. Chain him in the dungeons. Flog him until his back is raw. I want him broken. The soldiers roared their affirmation, hauling him away. Gerald, seeing the utter finality in her eyes, the complete erasure of the woman he loved, said nothing. He offered no defense, no plea. He simply hung his head as they dragged him towards the darkness, the precious pouch of medicine feeling like a stone tied to his drowning heart. However, Gerald's sudden reappearing upset Helga to the marrow. The heavy oak door to her chambers shuddered as she paced, a caged wolf in a cage of her own making. The silence of the room was suffocating, broken only by the frantic whisper of her silk nightgown and the ragged sound of her own breathing. The image of him, gaunt, weathered, but undeniably Gerald, was burned onto the back of her eyelids. Why? She snarled to the empty air, her voice cracking. Why now? After 5 years of silence, why crawl back into my world just to be captured? The injustice of it, the sheer, maddening frustration, boiled over. She snatched a second vase from a pedestal, a delicate piece of blue-glazed pottery, and hurled it against the wall where the first lay in shards. The crash was a satisfying punctuation to her rage. The door creaked open. Diana stood there, her face pale with concern. Seeing the storm in Helga's eyes and the fresh wreckage on the floor, she began to retreat. "Forgive me, Your Majesty," I heard the noise. "Stay," Helga commanded, the word more a plea than an order. The fight seemed to drain out of her all at once, leaving her trembling and hollow. She stumbled towards the great bed and sat on its edge, her shoulders slumping. Diana hesitated for only a moment before crossing the room. She did not bow. She simply sat beside her queen, her former charge, and wrapped her arms around her. It was the permission Helga needed. The dam broke. Sobs racked her body, ugly and unrestrained. "Why, Diana?" She wept into the older woman's shoulder. "Why must I carry this? This weight? He gets to wander the world while I sit here, drowning in this crown, in this grief. He killed my father and left me with a child he will never know. Why is he here to torment me further? Why does he not suffer?" Diana held her tighter, stroking her hair. "Shoo, my child. The night is always darkest before the dawn. Go to him. Not like this, not in rage. Go to him in the morning, when the sun is up and your heart is calm. Look him in the eye and ask your questions. You will have your answers." But the storm was not over. The mention of morning felt like an eternity. The rage and the heartbreak were a fire in her veins that would not be banked. "I cannot wait," Helga gasped, pulling away from Diana's embrace. Her tears were still wet on her cheeks, but her eyes were wild again. "I cannot breathe with him in my dungeons. I cannot think." "Helga, no!" Diana cried, but the queen was already on her feet, surging towards the door. Her bare feet were silent on the cold stone floors as she flew down the spiraling staircases, past startled guards who snapped to attention. The descent into the dungeons was a descent into a different world. A world of damp, of rot, and of despair. She heard it before she saw the cell. The sickening rhythmic crack of a whip striking flesh. Each impact made her flinch, but she forced her face into a mask of ice. She rounded the corner. 2 soldiers were at their work, their backs slick with sweat. Gerald was chained to the central post, his head bowed, his back a bloody map of his punishment. And he was silent, utterly, defiantly silent. Course he was. "Leave us," Helga's voice cut through the dank air, cold and sharp. The soldiers froze, lowering their whips. They bowed and scurried away without a word. The moment they were gone, Helga strode forward and snatched one of the whips from the floor. The leather was sticky with blood. She didn't allow herself to think. She just swung. The lash caught him high on the shoulders. "Why now?" she screamed, the words tearing from her throat. He swung again. "Why come back to haunt me? Again. Why do you make me suffer this?" Each strike was a punctuation for 5 years of loneliness, 5 years of anger, 5 years of loving a ghost. She was so lost in her fury that she almost missed the sound. His voice was a shredded whisper, so faint she had to stop to hear it. "I am sorry, Helga, for everything." The sincerity in that broken whisper was a hook in her soul. She faltered, the whip hanging limply in her hand. She looked away, swiping angrily at the fresh tears that blurred her vision. But the anger was a safer harbor than the grief, and she clung to it. "Sorry," she shrieked, the word echoing in the stone chamber. She brought the whip down again and again and again, each blow a rejection of his apology, a refusal to forgive, a desperate attempt to beat the love out of her own heart. "Sorry." She didn't stop until his body went completely limp, his head lolling forward, unconscious. The only sound left was her own ragged sobs and the drip of water, or blood, in the profound silence. The whip slipped from her numb fingers and fell to the straw-strewn floor with a soft, final thud. Without a second glance, she left his cell, more broken than she expected. One moment, Gerald was hanging limo in a cell, the next moment, he was in Helga's arms, inhaling the rarity of her scent. The dream was a perfect, painful echo. Sunlight dappled through the canopy of their secret grove in the woods. Helga was there, her head resting on his shoulder, her fingers laced with his. She smelled of summer and wildflowers. "Gerald," she whispered, her voice soft as it used to be. "If you could, would you leave it all? The past, the pain, the crowns. Would you just stay here with me? Forever?" His heart swelled, the answer a resounding, desperate yes on his lips. But before he could speak, the sunlight vanished and the cold rushed in. He woke with a gasp, the phantom scent of pine and Helga replaced by the stark aromas of antiseptic herbs and linen. Pain, a deep, throbbing fire across his back, anchored him to reality. He was lying on his stomach on a narrow but clean bed. His torso was meticulously wrapped in bandages, blinking against the soft light of a single candle. He turned his head. Master Alric sat in a chair beside the bed, watching him with a calm, clinical gaze. "Where?" Gerald's voice was a dry croak. "What happened?" "The Queen brought you here," Alric said simply. "After you lost consciousness in the dungeon. She ordered me to tend to your wounds." The memory flooded back, the cold dungeon, the bite of the whip and Helga's face, a mask of fury and torment, her tears glistening in the torchlight as she struck him. The hatred in her eyes was a colder steel than any blade. He tried to shift, and a jolt of pain made him grimace. Through a small window, he saw the silhouettes of 2 royal guards stationed outside. He was a prisoner still, just in a cleaner cage. He looked back at Alric, desperation cutting through the pain. "I need to see her, please. You must get me an audience with the Queen." Alric shook his head, a gesture of weary futility. "That is far above my station, son. I am a physician, not a courtier." "My mother," Gerald pleaded, the words raw. Her life depends on that medicine. Please, you have to help me. The door to the chamber swung open before Alric could respond. Helga stood there, framed in the doorway. She was dressed in her royal regalia, every inch the icy sovereign. Her eyes swept over him, taking in his bandaged state without a flicker of emotion. Your mother, she said, her voice as cold and sharp as a shard of ice, will die, just as you killed my father. So you can finally feel a fraction of the pain you have caused me. The words were a more effective blow than any whip. Helga, no, Gerald begged, pushing himself up on his elbows, ignoring the searing pain. She is innocent in all of this. Please, I beg you. Punish me, torture me, but do not let her die because of my sins. Her expression did not change. She looked at him as if he were a stranger, a piece of furniture. Your pleas are meaningless. With that, she turned and swept out of the room, the door closing with a definitive thud that echoed the finality in his heart. But outside, in the corridor, the queen's composure tightened like a drawn bowstring. She walked swiftly, not to her throne room, but to her chambers. Once inside, she summoned a soldier she knew to be discreet. Go to Master Alric, she commanded, her voice low and urgent. Tell him to find out from the prisoner where his mother lives. The village, the house, her name. Do it quietly. The soldier bowed and departed. He relayed the order to Alric, who, with a heavy heart, returned to Gerald's bedside. The Queen's guard wishes to know where your mother is. Her name, Alric said gently. Gerald, defeated and hopeless, saw no reason for deception. Kayla, he whispered, closing his eyes. She is the blacksmith's widow, in the village of Oakhaven on the English coast. He gave the specific location, a detailed description of the small forge and the cottage behind it. Alric relayed the information. The soldier returned to Helga, who was standing rigidly by her fireplace. Your Majesty, the information, the soldier reported, handing her a small scroll with the details. Helga took it, her fingers trembling slightly. She looked at the soldier. Take the medicine. All of it. Ride night and day. Find this woman, Kayla, and ensure she receives it. Do not reveal who sent you. Do not speak of this to anyone. Her survival is your only mission. As you command. The soldier took the pouch of medicine and was gone. As the door closed, a shadow moved from the antechamber. Diana entered, her face soft with understanding. You did the right thing, Helga, she said softly. Helga stiffened, not turning around. I did it for my son, she stated, her voice tight. So that he would not be entirely like his father. So that he would know mercy exists somewhere in his bloodline. Diana walked closer and placed a gentle hand on Helga's arm. My dear queen, she whispered. You can lie to your soldiers. You can lie to yourself. But you cannot lie to me. You did it because you still love him. Helga opened her mouth to retort, to deny it with the same fury she had wielded the whip. But no words came. She was utterly speechless, because in the deepest, most hidden chamber of her wounded heart, she knew Diana was right. Down in Alric's quarters, the welts on Gerald's back slowly knit together, but the wound in his spirit festered. The image of his mother, alone and succumbing to fever in her small cottage, was a constant, gut-wrenching torment. He had failed. The medicine was gone, and with it, his last hope. He requested one final audience with the Queen. Not to beg but to apologize. To accept his fate and ask for the one mercy of being allowed to bury his mother. To his surprise, Helga granted it. But she did not summon him to the throne room. She met him at the edge of the palace grounds, her expression unreadable. Walk with me, she commanded, turning without waiting for a reply and striding toward the ancient woods. Gerald's heart clenched. He knew this path. Every root, every turning oak was etched into his soul. Helga, why are we going there? He asked, his voice quiet. Be silent, she said without looking back, her tone leaving no room for argument. And follow. He did. his steps heavy with dread and a painful, flickering nostalgia. When they broke into the clearing, their clearing, he stopped dead. It was transformed. Where once there was wild undergrowth, now there was a carpet of soft moss and winter-blooming heather. Neatly trimmed pine boughs lined the edges, and someone had hung small, polished stones that caught the pale sunlight from the branches. A small, carved wooden bench sat where they used to lay their cloaks. It was beautiful, a sacred grove meticulously maintained. What did you do to this place?" Gerald whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Helga finally turned to face him. Her eyes glistened, but her chin was high. "You forgot about us. You left this place to the weeds and the wind." "I did not." Her voice broke slightly. "I did this for us. For the memory of what we were. It was all I had left." The weight of her words, the tangible proof of her enduring love amidst all the hatred, was too much. Gerald fell to his knees, the dam inside him finally breaking. "I'm sorry," he sobbed, the words tearing from a place he had kept locked for years. "Helga, I am so sorry. After my father was killed, it broke my mother. She was a shell. I watched the light leave her eyes day by day. The anger. It was a fire in my blood. I thought killing Selwyn would put it out. But it didn't. Just left me with more ashes. Have no peace. I have nothing." Helga listened, her body trembling. Then, with a sudden sharp movement, she stepped forward and slapped him across the face. The crack echoed in the quiet clearing. "Stop blaming the past," she cried, her own tears falling freely now. "Your father's death, your mother's grief. They are tragedies, but they are not an excuse. The hand that held the blade was yours, Gerald. The choice was yours. You have to carry that." "You are right," he said, his voice a broken whisper, his cheeks stinging. "I carry it, and I will carry it forever. Promise I will leave. I will be out of your life for good. Just let me go home to bury my mother." It was then that Helga herself dropped to her knees before him, her regal composure shattering completely. "You stupid, stupid man," she wept, grabbing the front of his tunic. "Do you think I am a monster? I sent a soldier with the medicine the very day after you were captured. He has already reached Oakhaven by now. Your mother lives, Gerald. She lives because I could not live with the thought of being the kind of person who lets an innocent woman die for revenge." Gerald stared at her, the world tilting on its axis. The relief was so profound it was dizzying. "Why?" he gasped. "After all I did to you, why?" "Because I want the circle to end," she cried. "I see it now. My father started it, you continued it, and I was ready to do the same. But I can't. I can't because—" She took a shuddering breath, her eyes holding his. "Because despite everything I still love you. And I want us to be a family." Gerald was utterly lost. "A family? What do you mean?" Helga's voice dropped to a whisper. "We have a son, Gerald." The words hung in the air, vast and impossible. Before he could process them, there was a rustle at the edge of the clearing. Diana stepped out, holding the hand of a small boy with unruly dark hair and serious brown eyes. Gerald's eyes. Diana gave the boy a gentle push. Floki walked forward, looking curiously at the kneeling man. Gerald's breath hitched. He looked from the boy to Helga, seeing the truth in her face. Overwhelmed, he opened his arms. Floki, after a moment's hesitation, walked into the gentle hug. Gerald held his son, his body shaking with silent sobs. "Thank you," he whispered to Helga, to Diana, to the gods. "Thank you for taking care of him." "Stay," Helga pleaded, her hand on his arm. "Stay with us. Be his father. Be with me." The choice was before him, more brutal than any battle. He looked at Helga, at the family he had never dared to dream of, then thought of his mother, alone in a cottage across the sea, finally healing, finally having her son return to her. "I cannot," he said, the words agony. "Helga, my mother has no one. No one at all. She has lost everyone. I have to go to her. So you choose her." Helga asked, her voice hollow with fresh hurt. It is not a choice of love, he said softly, getting to his feet. It is a choice of duty, of finally doing the right thing. Floki. He has a queen for a mother. He has a kingdom. He will want for nothing. My mother has only me. I appreciate your kindness more than I can ever say, but it would be better if I left. He gave his son one last, long look, memorizing his face. Then, without daring to look back at Helga, he turned and walked out of the clearing, leaving the family he had just found. Helga collapsed into the moss, her heart shattered anew. Diana rushed to her side, gathering her in her arms. "Do not blame him, my queen," Diana murmured, stroking her hair. "His mother has no one. No crown, no soldiers, no one to hold her hand. You have a whole kingdom. You have your son. You have me. He is going to care for the one who has nothing. It is the act of a good man." Helga sobbed, the sound muffled against Diana's shoulder. "I just wanted Floki to know his father." "And he will," Diana whispered, her gaze following the path Gerald had taken. "Someday he will. The circle is broken. The violence has ended. Now we must have faith that love will find a way back." Meanwhile, Gerald knew he'd never remain the same after his encounter with Helga and the shocking revelation of Floki, their son. Oh, how he wished he could stay and know him more. The scent of sawdust and hot iron clung to Gerald as he pushed open the door to his small cottage. It had been a long day at the forge, mending plows and shoeing horses, the familiar work a balm to a soul that still felt anchorless. The quiet of the house was usually a comfort, a sign of his mother's peaceful rest. But today the cottage was not quiet. He stopped in the doorway, his worn leather bag slipping from his fingers to the floor with a soft thud. The scene in his small living room was so surreal his mind refused to process it. Diana sat in his mother's favorite chair, a cup of tea in her hands, smiling. And on the floor by the hearth his mother, Kayla, was not just sitting up, she was laughing. A rich, full-bodied laugh he hadn't heard in years. And she was laughing with a small boy who was giggling uncontrollably, his dark hair falling into his eyes. "Floki." Before Gerald could form a single word, Floki looked up. His face lit up with recognition and a pure, uncomplicated joy. "Papa," he chirped, scrambling to his feet and darting across the room to wrap his small arms tightly around Gerald's legs. A wave of emotion, so powerful it stole his breath, washed over him. Mechanically, he bent down and lifted his son into his arms, the boy's small, warm body a solid, wonderful weight. He ruffled Floki's hair lightly, his voice a choked whisper. "Hello, little wolf. Where is your mother?" As if summoned, Helga stepped out of the small kitchen. But it was not Queen Helga who stood there. It was a version of her he had only ever dreamed of. She wore a simple homespun peasant dress, a humble apron tied around her waist. In one hand she held a spatula, smeared with what smelled like stew. Her hair was loosely tied back, a few strands escaping to frame her face, which was flushed from the heat of the hearth. She was breathtaking. Gerald gently set Floki down. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, his eyes never leaving hers. He didn't speak. He simply swept her into his arms, lifting her off the ground and spinning her in a slow, disbelieving circle. She dropped the spatula with a clatter and clung to him, her laughter mixing with her tears as he buried his face in her neck. They kissed, a salty, tear-streaked kiss that held 5 years of anguish, forgiveness, and a love that had refused to die. When he finally set her down, his hands cupped her face, his thumbs stroking her cheeks. "Helga," he breathed, his voice thick with emotion. "Why are you in my house? Dressed like my wife?" Just then it clicked. The abdicated throne. Her words in the forest. His eyes widened in stunned realization. You can't just make a decision like that," he stammered, a mixture of awe and panic in his voice. Helga's eyes, still shimmering with tears, sparkled with defiant love. If you can be stubborn, my love, so can I, she said, her voice firm. If you would not stay with us in the palace, then I decided we would come and live with you. Gerald looked past her, his gaze flying to Diana in a silent plea for reason. Diana merely shrugged, a small knowing smile on her face as if to say, "You try stopping her." Kayla, her eyes bright with happiness, slowly got to her feet. "Come, Diana. Floki, my dear, let's go see if the bread has cooled." She shepherded them both outside, leaving Gerald and Helga alone in the small warm cottage. "The throne. Your kingdom," Gerald said, still reeling. "The crown is nothing but cold metal without you," Helga said, her hands resting on his chest, over his pounding heart. "I have abdicated. The council has accepted my cousin. It is done. But I am a commoner, Helga. Blacksmith. I cannot give you the life you deserve. The riches, the comfort. I do not care for riches," she insisted, her voice passionate. "I have had a lifetime of cold, gilded halls. All I want is the warmth of this hearth. All I want is you, and our son, and this life." The last of his resistance crumbled. He saw the truth in her eyes, the same fierce, unwavering love that had drawn him to her a lifetime ago. He pulled her close again, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "Thank you," he whispered into her hair, his own tears falling freely now. "I promise you with everything I am, I will never hurt you again. I will spend my life making you happy." And so they did. The small blacksmith's cottage in Oakhaven became a palace of a different kind, filled not with the silence of royalty, but with the sounds of laughter and love. Gerald, Helga, and Floki lived in a peace they had both fought for and chosen, surrounded by the steadfast love of Diana and the gentle warmth of Kayla, a family forged not by crowns and bloodlines, but by forgiveness and an unbreakable bond.